Okay, so after an awful lot of indecision about what to do with this book, I've reached a decision on how I'm going to restore it. And what's driven it is, if you look very closely here, the light shining through, you can just about make out the bands, but interestingly, you see there's actually no band at the end, so the board's actually basically coming detached, just very faintly attached. And these are very thin bands. So these boards are actually more precariously attached than I'm giving them credit for. So what I'm going to do is I am going to sister these bands. So there will be sets of holes along here, one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, with string coming over here, and that will act as an extra reinforcement holding both boards on. I'm not going to remove this, and I'm not going to do anything to remove these, because they're functional, they're just getting old and wooden. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to soak off this leather, and I'm going to cut a nice broad strip along here, and that's going to form the basis of a new spine here. Now, these are all steps that I've done before, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leap through the various steps of drilling, threading, putting a piece of fabric on here, letting it dry, cutting the leather, sticking the leather on, because that's all been covered in my 1586 playlist, as well as the 1655 church history playlist. So I'm going to skip through those relatively quickly as a series of hops in this video, so we don't end up repeating everything. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some really nice corners of leather here and here, and it's a very simple method for doing that, which I'll go through, and I promise that I can take you through the math, but there's really no need for any sort of mathematical knowledge. It's just a very simple way of basically cutting any piece of paper as a template in such a way that you get a really accurate template for the leather to use. So we'll end up with leather here, and then we're going to get some really nice paper. So this paper is going to be about a foot square, and I'm going to cut it into two, along the diagonal, into two large triangles. So if I just put this on again for a second, I'll put another one on here. For a second, what we'll end up with, and that one escaped, what we'll end up with is a piece of paper shaped in a big triangle like this. That's going to cover the edges of the leather here, here, and what will ultimately be here. Probably going to go for a dark green, dark purple, something like that, but I haven't decided. But it's going to end up looking not dissimilar to this. Nice piece of leather here. See that label? We have the equivalent here that I'm going to try and reuse. We'll have leather here, beautiful paper here, and then on the inside of the book, where we're going to have a mess because we'll have paper folded down, we'll have leather coming in, we'll have the holes that we've drilled. We're going to put a nice new end paper there. And that will be the restoration. So what I'm now going to do is just quickly skip through the initial steps that I mentioned, because we've covered them elsewhere. Okay, so step one, I've sistered the existing raised bands that were buried under that collar, sistered them with new threads on top, and each of these pieces of string is sitting in basically a strip of papier-mâché that's composed of a blend of school glue and toilet tissue. And as you can see, I've put this fabric on top and really slathered on a lot more glue, bedding down the fabric between the ribs. That's going to help the glue to really soak through the fabric and get into the cardboard underneath. So that's going to basically make this fabric, the bands and the cardboard underneath, one sort of cohesive whole. So I'm going to leave this now to just evaporate and set overnight. And the next step tomorrow is we'll drill the holes here in the boards to be ready to thread these bands through. So that's where we're at. Okay, so overnight the fabric and glue set very nicely. As you can see here, we have some really nice raised bands there. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've snipped the fabric along where the bands are. That's because the fabric actually needs to go through this gap in the board here. And so what we then are going to do is, as you can see, there's daylight hopefully there, just visible. So what we're going to do is push the fabric through. It's being a bit truculent there. There we go. Like so. And these twines need to go through as well. So the first thing I need to do is to gently unwind them, separate them. Now they're going to sort of do a one-time final sort of curl up when you do that, but then after that they'll be free like that. And then each of these actually then needs to also find their way through to the other side of the board, but this time above the fabric. So this one I can be lazy, I can just take that one through. These two just need another gentle push. And this one too. Like so. So we're going to continue that process all the way along here. And the results will look like this. We'll have all the fabric here and the bands as well. So what that will enable us to do then is to drill sets of 3 holes in these 7 locations. We'll sew these in and then we'll stick the fabric down as well and snip them. So we'll basically end up with a strip of reinforcement here. That means that, you know, short of a very violent event, these boards will never become separate from the textbook. So that's the next step. Okay, so we have attached the twine of these raised ribs now to the boards, having drilled the holes, and I've also used glue to stick down the fabric. So what that's going to do is just give a little bit of rigidity to the board, so it'll just help reduce any sort of lateral movement. So while that sets there, I've obtained a section of kitchen roll, like so, and I'm going to just cut along its length. Now, if you've seen some of the other restorations I've done, you'll have seen me fashion kitchen roll into a pair of sort of cone-shaped pieces that I then sort of put together over the spine. I'm not going to do that this time. I think the spine's not that broad, so we're going to be able to just have one section of cardboard with some slats cut in it. So those slats will allow these raised ribs to show through. So the cardboard will basically lie here, across here, as such. And we'll have some holes in just to allow for these bumps where the string is here. So the advantage of just having one piece is it's thinner, so it will sit down quite sort of snug against the spine here, so we should still have a reasonable show through of these raised bands when we put the leather strip on to make the new outer spine. So that's the plan. The way I'm going to do this is just fold this roughly in half, and then I'm going to simply mark with the pen here. I'm going to mark, actually, there we go, it doesn't need to be desperately accurate, just mark where the raised bands are with a functioning pen. Let's try this one. Nope, try that. Just along here. Yeah, like so. And then basically just cut a slat that's half like so. So basically a series of those down here. So that's the next step. Okay, so we now have the cardboard on with these holes and so on. So that's going to nicely keep the leather separate from the fabric when we put it on. So the final step in this phase, before we get on to the really interesting stuff, is to put the leather cover on here. Now, the one thing that's worrying me slightly is the board that's going to make the leather is only very slightly larger than this way, than the spine itself. So I'm hoping again that the leather goes in a fair distance here and here, so that we have a reasonable amount to fold over. The issue is that these ribs, they're going to obviously create undulations in the leather that will actually cause the leather to need to be a little longer, just a little. I might be able to get away with just using stretch, but even so, it's going to be a tight run thing. So I'm going to create a nice strip along here. In actual fact, I could even leave this raggedy edge because there's this is going to be covered by nice ornamental paper eventually. But a nice strip here that we'll put along here, and we'll brace using the shims and the ties, and that'll create a nice backing for the book. And then we'll be able to get onto the new bit, which is how do we do the leather corners and the paper. But anyway, that's the next step. So we'll do that, and then that'll complete in effect the prep that we need for this book. So there we go. The pull up a little bit there. There we go. The book's in its brace, the leather's on. Got some nice show through starting to develop of those raised bands. So I'm going to let this leather dry. It's under a lot of tension at the moment. So we'll let the book rest for the night, and then tomorrow we'll be on to putting the corners on and other stuff.